Good morning, students. Welcome to the biology class. Today we are continuing with our same chapter, How do organisms reproduce? In our previous session, we discussed about the structure of flower, which is being known as the sexual part of the flower or the reproductive part of the flower. Today we are going to the process of sexual reproduction in plants. The process of sexual reproduction in plants include number one is pollination, number two is fertilization, and then it is post-fertilization. So one by one this process will be discussed that how the fertilization and how the reproduction is going to be complete in the flowering plant. First is pollination. The process of transfer of pollen from anther to the stigma is called pollination. So what is pollination? The process of transfer of pollen. What is pollen? That is the male gamete which are being formed in the anther. So transfer of pollen from anther to the stigma. What is stigma? Stigma is the platform or the receptacle part of the female reproductive system. Anther is the male part in which the pollens are being formed, and the transfer of the pollen from the anther to the stigma, that is, you can say, the sticky part of the female reproductive system or gynoecium or pistil, where they are going to be fall on the stigma. That is of two types, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. What is self-pollination? It is a transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the same flower or of another flower of the same plant. The example is groundnut oxalis. So here in this picture you can see that is the male reproductive part. This is the anther in which the pollens are going to be formed. This is the stigma, which is the female reproductive part, and the anther that produce the pollen grain. They are going to be fall on the stigma of the same plant. So this is what called as a self-pollination. Cross-pollination, it is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of another flower of another plant but of a same species. So that is the anther and this is the stigma. The transfer of pollen grains from one flower to the another flower, that is on the stigma, and the anther of this to the stigma of this flower, and that is a different flower or a different plant but of the same species. They belong to the same species of the flower, that is your hibiscus, that is your China rose. Cross-pollination occurs with the help of different agencies. Agencies means the agents, mean that with the help of some agents, with the help of some, you can say the biotic and abiotic agents. Abiotic means wind and water, so they helps in the transfer of the pollen grains, and insects and animal, they help in the transfer of the pollen grain. In this, you can say the flow chart, you can see this is the abiotic factor, that is your wind and the water, and how with the help of the wind the pollen grains from one plant falls on the stigma of another plant, and through the water how they are being transported or being transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower. And here is the bird that is known as your hummingbird. So with the help of that, that is the pollination takes place, the insect, that is the butterfly, and there is the bat. So they also helps in transferring of the pollen grains from one flower to the another. So they are known as your pollination agent or the pollinating agents. So after the transfer of the pollen grain on the stigma of the female reproductive part, then the process start is known as fertilization. What is fertilization? The fusion of male and the female gametes, that is the pollen grain, with the egg to form the zygote, which is the result of the fertilization, is called as fertilization. So first I will discuss from this diagram. So these are the pollen grains. They fall on the stigma, that is of the female reproductive part, and from the pollen grain a pollen tubes comes out. So as the one pollen tubes will come, the another pollen tubes, they are going to be degenerate. So that pollen tube which is coming out from the pollen grain passes through the style, and then they reaches to the ovary where the ova is being present. This is the female germ cell, and this is the pollen tube that carries the male germ cells. So they reaches to the ovary where the female germ cell or the egg are present. Now they fuse to form the zygote, and the process is known as the fertilization. So this is the longitudinal section of the, you can say, the female part, to which you can see that how the fertilization takes place. So after pollination, pollen grain reaches the stigma and develops a tube called as a pollen tube. A tube grows out of the pollen grain and travels through the style to reach the female germ cell present in the ovule in the ovary out of two male gametes. So this thing you have to remember, that in the pollen tube we are having a two male gamete, and the one male gamete present in the pollen tube fuses to form the egg, fuses with egg to form the zygote, and the process is known as the fertilization, whereas the second male gamete is fuses with the polar nuclei to form the primary endosperm, that you will learn in your higher classes. So fertilization is a process of fusion of the male gamete with the female gamete present in the ovule of the ovary and result into the formation of the zygote. So this is that how the fertilization takes place along with the diagram. Very important question. Now comes the post-fertilization, that after the fertilization, the zygote is formed, then what changes takes place? So zygote divide several times to form an embryo within the ovule. So what is the fate? Fate of zygote. Fate means what will be the result from the zygote. Fate means F-A-T-E. So what will be the result of the zygote? What will zygote form? That is what known as a fate. So that will be formed into the embryo. Ovule, where the fertilization takes place, they develop the tough coat and gradually turn into the seed. And these tough coat will form the seed coat. Ovary grow rapidly and ripens to form the fruit. Meanwhile, petals, sepals, stamens, style, stigma may shrivel and fall off. So what will be the result, or what will be the post-fertilization changes, and what will happen to the zygote? They will develop into the embryo. Ovule will ripen to form the seed, and ovary will develop into the, or ripen to form the fruit. If the question is there, what is seed? Seed is ripened ovule. What is fruit? Fruit is ripened ovary, and embryo that is formed by the several divisions of the zygote. So that is the definition of fruit, seed, and embryo. In this image you can see this is the pre-fertilization changes in which the pollination takes place. And after the pollination, they fall on the stigma, they develop the pollen tube along with the male gamete, reaches to the ovule of the ovary where the fertilization takes place. And after the fertilization, the seed, that is ovule, will form the seed, and the ovary will ripen to form the fruit. So these are the post-fertilization changes, and all the steps, you can say the petals, sepals, and stamen, and you can say the style, the stigma, they all fall off That is what called as the post-fertilization changes. Now next is the seed formation, that how the new plant will come into the existence. The seed contains the future plant or the embryo. So whenever you can see any of a dicot seed, for example, while eating the groundnut, if you open, you will find a small structure inside which is known as the embryo, and they are having a future root that is known as the radicle, and the future shoot that is known as the plumule, and these two cotyledon that is the future leaf in which the food is being stored. This is the cross section, or you can say the transverse section of a gram seed, which is the dicot. So the seed contains the future plant or the embryo, and when the seed is being sown under the favorable condition, they will comes out with a seedling, the germination takes place, and then the process of formation of the plants start. So embryo possesses the radicle that is known as your future root, and the plumule that is your future shoot, and cotyledon that is your future leaves where the food is stored. The embryo develops into the seedling under the favorable condition. This process of development of seedling from the seed is called as germination. And what are the favorable condition? Means the temperature adequate, means the favorable or the optimum temperature, the moisture, the water. These are the favorable condition. And if these favorable conditions are not being present, the seed will remain in the dormant condition, means they are not going to germinate. As you can see, we are having a number of the pulses in the form of a gram, bean, and more lot of pulses are there. All are in the airtight containers. We store them in the airtight containers, and they are not going to germinate because they are not getting the favorable conditions. But when you put them into the sprout condition, you can say into the moisture condition, then your gram they get sprouted, the pulses they get sprouted. The sprouted means that is the germination, means अंकुरित दालें, अंकुरित चने जब हम उन्हें भिगोते हैं एक पर्टिकुलर टेम्परेचर पे, पर्टिकुलर मॉइस्चर में, आजकल बहुत सारे ऐसे कंटेनर आते हैं जहां हम कहते हैं जी स्प्राउट दालें बनेंगी, एंड दैट स्प्राउट दैट कमिंग आउट, that is known as a seedling, and then they will develop into the new plant, because inside the seed, inside the gram, you are having the embryo, and that embryo will develop only when the favorable conditions are given. If they are being stored in the airtight container where there is no moisture, they are not going to be germinated. So this is what called as a seed formation or the seed germination. You can see these diagrams are very important, and they are very important as an MCQ question, because this particular, you can say, the segment of the chapter, that is a seed formation, is also being present in your practicals. That I will just show you that how that particular seeds, you open it and you will find the embryo inside, and then they will develop into the new plants. So go through them very carefully, try to understand, copy down in your biology notebooks along with the diagram. And session, we discuss about the reproduction in human beings, because we have finished with our plants. We finished first, we started with the asexual reproduction, then we started with the plant reproduction, in which we discuss about the vegetative reproduction, then we discuss about the sexual reproduction and the sexual reproductive part of the plant, that is the flower. And today we discuss the process in which what is pollination, what is fertilization, what are the various process or the steps of fertilization, that how the zygote is going to be formed, then post-fertilization, and then the seed formation. With this, we finish the plant reproduction, and in our next lesson, we will discuss about the reproduction in human beings. Till then, stay home, stay happy, stay healthy. Thank you.